Greetings to everyone at World Book Night 2012 from my kitchen in Toronto, Canada. Last year, I was at the first World Book Night of the UK and Ireland. It was extremely memorable because it was held in Trafalgar Square and it was freezing cold with the wind blowing things over. But there was a great, though chilly crowd and an almost giddy level of enthusiasm for the simple idea of giving away books as gifts. I'm sure that this year again, you, the givers, have selected a wide range of people, many of whom would never have read the book that you are giving them if it weren't for you. You're sharing your passion for reading and your delight in stories, and those are very old and human things to share. World Book Night could not happen without you, the gift givers. And the neurologists tell us that it really does make us happier to give gifts, so I hope you are all very happy right now. Wish I were there.
Good evening, London and the rest of the country, and welcome to the second World Book Night. I'm Simon Cowell. Now, I'm not, but if we stop cherishing books, I might as well be. Think on. I'm Hardeep Singh Kholi, and it's a huge privilege and a pleasure to be here tonight. I am your host for the evening. If I could ask you at this point to leave your mobile phones on, because my uncle's on his way down from Wolverhampton. My battery's run out and I've given him all your phone numbers, so obviously turn your phones off. I'd also like to especially welcome givers. Are there any people giving out there? Well, it was with you in mind I wanted just to start with a tiny excerpt from a World Book Night giver. Her name's Sarah. I chose Small Island as my book because my West London patch is home to the most amazing mixture of races and religions. Of course, there are indigenous English, but we have a large Somali community, an active Anglo-Caribbean one, Ugandans and Kenyan Asians, loads of Poles and other Europeans. Acton isn't a rich area. I gave my books away in the Oaks shopping centre, home to peacock and pound shops. No book in sight. It's frankly scruffy and well overdue for a major refurbishment. But my books were lapped up. One lady said it gave her goosebumps to be given a book on Shakespeare's birthday. I thought she was going to cry. Then she shook my hand, then she hugged me. A tall young black man insisted on demonstrating he could read before telling me that Small Island was going to help him give up smoking. Whenever he felt like a fag, he would just read this book instead. The girl at the threading stall was already discussing the book with her mate by the time I left. One mum who had two children, both holding books, which she'd just bought in the pound shop. She was really chuffed to have a proper one for herself. She and her son waved all the way down the centre. That's what World Book Night is about. It's about real people being genuinely touched and lit up by literature. Thank you, obviously, to Margaret Atwood for that lovely message. It's the closest I'll ever get to meeting her, I imagine. It was Margaret Atwood's idea. She first gave away books inspired by Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift. And she's, of course, a World Book Night patron. For those of you that don't know, World Book Night was launched last year. 1 million books were given away, and a huge event in Trafalgar Square. Memorable, clearly, for a number of reasons. Last year, 1 million books were given away. This year, there are 25 titles with 20,000 givers, which makes 500,000. The remaining 500,000 are being sent directly into hard-to-reach places like prisons and schools and disadvantaged areas, really delivering what World Book Night is meant to deliver. And due to the success, can you believe, in just 12 months, World Book Night will appear across 4 countries, America, Germany, Ireland, and of course the UK. Tonight is being streamed live across libraries and an art centre. Bristol, Edinburgh, Birmingham, Newcastle, they're all cheering where they are now. So why don't we recreate the atmosphere by pretending, as I say each place, that is where we're from? Can we do that? Because books allow us to imagine. In my book, I'm good looking. Do you see? Imagination. This is being streamed live to Bristol. Edinburgh. Birmingham. Newcastle, Leicester, Kensington, Paddington, ambivalent, I think, Paddington, at best. The live streaming is found on www.worldbooknight.org, courtesy of HiBROW TV. And we've got video messages from America, Canada, because it's separate from America, apparently. Somebody's not wearing their satire trousers. And Germany. I'd like also at this point, there are lots of organisations that have been behind World Book Night, but two really ought to be thanked. The official media patron, the BBC. I am, of course, biased. I love working for the BBC. Alan Yentob from BBC TV and Jane Ellison from Radio 4. I know that the organisers are much in debt to the work they do. And for me, the founding charity sponsors, the Reading Agency, Miranda McKerney. And the reason I'm here tonight, the reason I'm involved in World Book Night, I was on last year's panel that selected the books, is down to a woman who's in Newcastle tonight called Sandy Mahal. You couldn't hope for a more passionate advocate for books. I don't know a woman whose life has been changed as much by books, and she's handing that change on to everyone she meets. There isn't anyone in the publishing industry that isn't as passionate about Sandy Mahal as I am. So thanks to both those organisations. Now, let me ask our first speaker. She's the artistic director of the Southbank, so everyone's boss tonight. Jude Kelly. She's chair of trustees of World Book Night and on the board of the Cultural Olympiad. She is just one of Britain's leading artistic directors and producers, and for anyone that knows her, is quite simply an inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, Jude Kelly.
Hello. Well, it's always tremendous to welcome everybody to the Southbank Centre, and it's always tremendous to welcome everybody in all those libraries and spaces outside across the UK, and indeed to think of this, because it is World Book Night on Shakespeare's birthday, to think of this as something which truly belongs to the world. And I think you've just heard that in 1 year it hurtled forward so quickly that it already is establishing itself in other parts of the world. But the great dream, of course, is that at some stage this community of givers will expand right across the continents. And why not? The book and the idea of reading a story and the idea of telling a story is so fundamental to us as humans that in a way, once we have a story that we cherish, we can't wait to pass it on to somebody else. And when it's beautifully crafted and beautifully written, then in a way, even though it might not be your personal story, handing it to somebody else and saying you'll cherish this, you'll love it, and you'll learn from it, it is a real gift. And so in founding World Book Night, I want to commend and celebrate Jamie Byng, who's in the audience. I'm going to insist he stands up just for posterity's sake. Where is he? And I'm also going to congratulate him for being able to stand at all, because yesterday he ran the marathon for World Book Night to raise money for World Book Night, because this is a charity, and as a charity we are still needing to raise funds for it, and the fact that he can stand just demonstrates that his stamina isn't just a mental and intellectual one, he's got a good body. But in founding World Book Night, really the driving force behind this was this notion of sharing the book, sharing the story, sharing reading, and communities coming together, thinking, well, I might not know my next-door neighbour, but I could go and give them a book, and that might be a starting point. And with that in mind, thinking about books and thinking about reading, how many publishers are in the house tonight? Publishers are great. I mean to say, this is a very, very important thing to say, right? We're giving away 20,000 readers are giving away 500,000 books, and another 500,000 books are being given away to hospitals and libraries and prisons. But these books don't get sourced from nowhere. Publishers are the way that these books arrive. And publishing is a magnificent way of making sure that something from the imagination of a writer travels to the hands of a reader, and publishers are the agency through which this happens. Not the only, but the very, very important thing. So we'd like to thank the publishers in particular for doing this extraordinary thing, which seems counterintuitive, to give away free books. But nevertheless, 1 million of these free books is what publishers have backed to do, in the belief that we all share that the more you cultivate reading, the more books transfer around the world. Jamie was not only running the marathon yesterday, this morning he was in Wormwood Scrubs, because a key part of this is for people who don't have access to books, or maybe don't have access to books that have the greatest stories in them. And then Tracy Chevalier was in the Royal Free Hospital this afternoon, similarly, and that's just a particle of the many, many stories of gifting that's been happening today. So this is the second year of World Book Night. As I say, as a charity, we intend to grow and we intend to widen this. Anything that you can do in this hall or listening, if you think you have money that you'd like to contribute, then we certainly would like to hear from you. We have 100 World Book Night givers as special guests here tonight, as well as the World Book Night media partners, the BBC, and our founding charity partner, the Reading Agency. And we have many, many other people who wanted to come tonight. So in a way, we're speaking on behalf of a huge community. But maybe the final thank you is to the writers, because without artists who are prepared to lead sometimes an extremely lonely, isolated, slogging sort of life in order to craft these stories, we wouldn't have them to give away. So I'd like to thank the artists. Welcome to World Book Night on behalf of the Southbank Centre and me as Chair of World Book Night. Welcome.
Thanks, Jude. I did a conference once where they put pictures of you up behind you as you spoke. Little did I realise I was wearing exactly the same clothes. It looked as if I had a very limited wardrobe. You can laugh. It's difficult for me. I'm the child of an immigrant. I've had to fight that sort of prejudice all my life. I have at least 2 articles of clothing. Next, we have a video message. You may have noticed earlier I talked about Germany coming on board. And Jörg Fuhl is a creative force behind World Book Night in Germany, and they're also doing World Book Night for the first time this year. So run VT. It's not really VT.
London. Hello, book lovers. My name is Jörg Fuhl. I'm chairman of the German Reading Foundation, and I have the honor of chairing World Book Night in Germany this year. I must tell you, I'm terribly excited. I'm standing on the stage where we're going to kick off the first World Book Night event in Germany in front of Hamburg Town Hall. World Book Day was launched by UNESCO 17 years ago, and I'm proud to say that with World Book Night, it's finally growing up. More than 40,000 givers signed up to share their passion for reading, and 1 million copies of 25 great titles were given away this past week. Do you recognize the similarities? It would not have been without the great success of World Book Night in the UK. We would not have dared to go on this journey without your example. So I say thank you to all of you who made this possible. Jamie Bing and the entire World Book Night team, and all of you givers. Thank you in the name of 1 million people who received the gift of reading this week. I have been active in literacy projects for 10 years, and I know that we're making a difference in many people's lives. So thank you once again, and I hope that you will have as much fun tonight as we certainly will have in Hamburg. Go out and share the passion.
Fairly impressive there. The only thing I can say in German is "Was ist das? Das in eine Karton." What is that? That is a box. If I'd have dated that girl beyond 4 months, perhaps I could have made that speech in German. Time for one of our first readings. Just off the plane from South Africa, he's not just a World Book Night trustee, not just a Southbank artist, he's the official Olympic poet. He's also a man that 20-odd years ago he won't thank me for saying, although it doesn't show on him quite as it shows on me. He inspired me through poetry in Manchester. Ladies and gentlemen, reading from the Bards As You Like It, the inimitable Lemn Sissay.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. His acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good cape on, lined with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so, he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank and his big manly voice, turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all, that ends this strange, eventful history, is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything.
Doesn't look anything like Lemn, does it? I could have sworn that was written for him. I think that's the mark of truly great writing, is you hear something different each time it's read, or you experience something different each time you read it. It's funny, I was in the Isle of Wight yesterday. I know. And they asked me to read a bit of my favourite book for their library for today. And I read a bit from A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry, one of last year's books. And I struggle, as a lot of our readers have, I struggle to find something from the middle of a book that has context and that engages. But I just literally opened the book and read a paragraph, and I just, I've got another 3 readings of that book before I die, I've said to myself. So number 2 will be coming up. Our next reader is David Nicholls, author of one of the most successful books of 2011. Last year, his novel One Day was a World Book Night selection, and one I personally can say I was very happy to see on the list. And he read at Trafalgar Square. We've tried all we can to bring the weather inside for David. Tonight, in his ever self-effacing style, David's reading from Dickens' Great Expectation, which he recently adapted for a film. Ladies and gentlemen, David Nicholls.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to read from a little-known, obscure writer who hasn't got nearly as much attention as he deserves. I don't know if you've noticed, often when people talk about Dickens, they use it as an opportunity to talk about what incredibly precocious readers they were. It's always, I was 6 years old when I read Martin Chuzzlewit for the 2nd time, or the sperm met the egg and I reached for Barnaby Rudge. I came to this book a little later, probably in my mid to late teens, and to be honest, I don't think the first time I read it, I don't think I necessarily understood it all. But what did strike me and what seemed extraordinary to me was that someone had picked up a pen in 1858 and made some marks on a piece of paper and somehow managed to summarize exactly how I felt as a teenage boy in a small town in 1981. And there was something miraculous about that. And it's been my favorite book ever since. There have occasionally been tussles from usurpers like Tender as the Night and Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Franny and Zooey, but I always come back to Great Expectations. And I hope I don't ruin it for you now by reading a short passage. This is Pip's first trip to Satie's house, where he meets Estella and Miss Havisham. And I'd like to apologize in advance for my performance of Miss Havisham. I hope it's not too fruity and over the top. In many ways, it's the part I was born to play. So here we go. He's just met the beautiful Estella. So, though she called me boys so often, and with a carelessness that was far from complimentary, she was of about my own age. She seemed much older than I, of course, being a girl, and beautiful and self-possessed, and she was as scornful of me as if she had been 21 and a queen. We went into the house by a side door. The great front entrance had 2 chains across it outside, and the first thing I noticed was that the passages were all dark, and that she had left a candle burning there. She took it up, and we went through more passages and up a staircase, and still it was all dark, and only the candle lighted us. At last we came to the door of a room, and she said, "Go in." I answered, more in shyness than politeness, "After you, miss." To this she returned, "Don't be ridiculous, boy, I am not going in," and scornfully walked away, and, what was worse, took the candle with her. This was very uncomfortable, and I was half afraid. However, the only thing to be done being to knock at the door, I knocked and was told from within to enter. I entered, therefore, and found myself in a pretty large room, well lighted with wax candles. No glimpse of daylight was to be seen in it. It was a dressing room, as I suppose from the furniture, though much of it was of forms and uses that then quite unknown to me, but prominent in it was a draped table with a gilded looking-glass, and that I made out at first sight to be a fine lady's dressing table. Whether I should have made out this object so soon if there had been no fine lady sitting at it, I cannot say. In an armchair, with an elbow resting on the table and her head leaning on that hand, sat the strangest lady I have ever seen or shall ever see. She was dressed in rich materials, satins and lace and silks, all of white. Her shoes were white, and she had a long white veil dependent from her hair, and she had bridal flowers in her hair, but her hair was white. Some bright jewels sparkled on her neck and on her hands, and some other jewels lay sparkling on the table. Dresses, less splendid than the dress she wore, and half-packed trunks were scattered about. She had not quite finished dressing, for she had but one shoe on. The other was on the table near her hand. Her veil was but half arranged, her watch and chain were not put on, and some lace for her bosom lay with those trinkets, and with her handkerchief and gloves and some flowers and a prayer book, all confusedly heaped about the looking-glass. It was not in the first few moments that I saw all these things, though I saw more of them in the first moments than might be supposed, but I saw that everything within my view, which ought to be white, had been white long ago and had lost its lustre and was faded and yellow. I saw that the bride with the bridal dress had withered like the dress and like the flowers, and had no brightness left but the brightness of her sunken eyes. I saw that the dress which had been put on the rounded figure of a young woman, and that the figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone. Once I had been taken to see some ghastly waxwork at the fair, representing I know not what impossible personage lying in state. Once I had been taken to our old marsh churches to see a skeleton in the ashes of a rich dress that had been dug up out of a vault under the church pavement. Now, waxwork and skeleton seemed to have dark eyes that moved and looked at me. I should have cried out if I could. "Who is it?" said the lady at the table. "Pip, ma'am. Pip. Mr. Pumblechook's boy, ma'am. Come to play. Come nearer. Let me look at you. Come close." It was when I stood before her, avoiding her eyes, that I took note of the surrounding objects in detail and saw that her watch had stopped at 20 minutes to 9, and that a clock in the room had stopped at 20 minutes to 9. "Look at me," said Miss Havisham. "You are not afraid of a woman who has never seen the sun since you were born?" I regret to state that I was not afraid of telling the enormous lie comprehended in the answer, "No." "Do you know what I touch here?" she said, laying her hands, one upon the other, on her left side. Yes, ma'am." "What do I touch?" "Your heart." "Broken." She uttered the word with an eager look and with strong emphasis and with a weird smile that had a kind of boast in it. Afterwards, she kept her hands there for a little while and slowly took them away as if they were heavy. "I am tired," said Miss Havisham. "I want diversion, and I have done with men and women. Play." I think it will be conceded by my most disputatious reader that she could hardly have directed an unfortunate boy to do anything in the wide world more difficult to be done under the circumstances. "I sometimes have sick fancies," she went on, "and I have a sick fancy that I want to see some play. There, there," with an impatient movement of her fingers of her right hand. "Play, play, play." Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Seems rather apt. David should be reading from Great Expectations, which I think anyone who's read any of his books probably feels about the next one he's writing. I always feel with Dickens that if Dickens were alive today, he would be communicating on a mass level, and I think we sometimes rarefy literature and we think it's for a chosen few. I think for anyone that listened to Bombay Chuzzlewit's on Radio 4 last year or any of the other brilliant coverage, Dickens wrote for the masses, and that's, I think, something we would do well to remember. I am quite pompous, aren't I? I'm much less pompous when I'm wearing Adidas, so maybe I'll bear that in mind for next year. Our next writer has literally pulled herself away from her word processor. She has 10 days to deliver her next book. She's a columnist and an author of books including My Life on a Plate. And tonight she reads from one of the shortlisted books from this year, I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, India Night.
I'm so not on the ball that I thought this was an informal event for about 50 people in the foyer. So I apologise in advance for the inadequacies of my reading. I write this sitting in the kitchen sink. That is, my feet are in it. The rest of me is on the draining board, which I have padded with our dog's blanket and the tea cosy. I can't say that I'm really comfortable, and there's a depressing smell of carbolic soap, but this is the only part of the kitchen where there is any daylight left, and I have found that sitting in a place where you've never sat before can be inspiring. I wrote my very best poem while sitting on the hen house. Though even that isn't a very good poem, I've decided my poetry is so bad I mustn't write any more of it. Drips from the roof are plopping into the water butt by the back door. The view through the windows above the sink is excessively drear. Beyond the dank garden in the courtyard are the ruined walls on the edge of the moat. Beyond the moat, the boggy ploughed fields stretch to the leaden sky. I tell myself that all the rain we've had lately is good for nature, and that at any moment spring will surge on us. I try to see leaves on the trees in the courtyard filled with sunlight. Unfortunately, the more my mind's eye sees green and gold, the more drained of all colour does the twilight seem. It is comforting to look away from the windows and towards the kitchen fire, near which my sister Rose is ironing, though she obviously can't see properly, and it will be a pity if she scorches her only nightgown. I have two, but one is mine as it's behind. Rose looks particularly fetching by firelight because she is a pinkish gold, very light and feathery. Although I'm rather used to her, I know she is a beauty. She's nearly 21 and very bitter with life. I'm 17, look younger, feel older. I'm no beauty, but have a neatish face. I've just remarked to Rose that our situation is really rather romantic, two girls in this strange and lonely house. She replied that she saw nothing romantic about being shut up in a crumbling ruin surrounded by a sea of mud. I must admit that our home is an unreasonable place to live in, yet I love it. The house itself was built in the time of Charles II, but it was damaged by Cromwell. The whole of our east wall was part of the castle. There are 2 round towers in it. The gatehouse is intact, and a stretch of the old walls at their full height joins it to the house. And Belmont Tower, all that remains of an even older castle, still stands on its mound close by. But I won't attempt to describe our peculiar house fully until I can see more time ahead of me than I do now. I'm writing this journal partly to practice my newly acquired speed writing and partly to teach myself how to write a novel. I intend to capture all our characters and put in conversations. It ought to be good for my style to dash along without much thought, as up to now my stories have been very stiff and self-conscious. The only time Father obliged me by reading one of them, he said that I combined stateliness with a desperate effort to be funny. He told me to relax and let the words flow out of me. I wish I knew a way to make words flow out of Father. Years and years ago, he wrote a very unusual book called Jacob Wrestling, a mixture of fiction, philosophy and poetry. It was a great success, particularly in America, where he made a lot of money by lecturing on it, and he seemed likely to become a very important writer indeed. But he stopped writing. Mother believed this was due to something that happened when I was about 5. We were living in a small house by the sea at the time. Father had just joined us after his second American lecture tour. One afternoon, when we were having tea in the garden, he had the misfortune to lose his temper with Mother, very noisily, just as he was about to cut a piece of cake. He brandished the cake knife at her so menacingly that an officious neighbour jumped the garden fence to intervene and got himself knocked down. Father explained in court that killing a woman with our silver cake knife would be a long, weary business entailing sawing her to death, and he was completely exonerated of any intention of slaying Mother. The whole case seems to have been quite ludicrous, with everyone but the neighbour being very funny, but Father made the mistake of being funnier than the judge, and as there was no doubt whatever that he had seriously damaged the neighbour, he was sent to prison for 3 months. When he came out, he was as nice a man as ever, nicer really, because his temper was so much better. Apart from that, he didn't seem to me to be changed at all, but Rose remembers that he'd already begun to get unsociable. It was then that he took a 40-year lease of the castle, which is an admirable place to be unsociable in. Once we were settled here, he was supposed to begin a new book, but time went on without anything happening, and at last we realized that he'd given up even trying to write. For years now, he's refused to discuss the possibility. Most of his life is spent in the gatehouse room, which is icy cold in winter, as there is no fireplace. He just huddles over an oil stove. As far as we know, he does nothing but read detective novels from the village library. Miss Marcy, the librarian and schoolmistress, brings them to him. She admires him greatly and says, "The iron has entered his soul." Personally, I can't see how the iron could get very far into a man's soul during only 3 months in jail. Anyway, not if the man has as much vitality as Father had, and he seemed to have plenty of it left when they let him out. But it has gone now, and his unsociability has grown almost into a disease. I often think he would prefer not even to meet his own household. All his natural gaiety has vanished. At times he puts on a false cheerfulness that embarrasses me, but usually he's either morose or irritable. I think I should prefer it if he lost his temper as he used to. Oh, poor Father, he really is very pathetic, but he might at least do a little work in the garden. I'm aware that this isn't a fair portrait of him. I must capture him later. Thanks very much.
Thanks, India. I was having dinner with my son last week, and the notion of books came up because, as a father of a boy, I never feel he reads enough. The problem is trying to get his sister to stop reading and go to bed. And he said to me, when he was 8, I gave him a copy of Jonathan Livingston's Seagull. He was 8. I was forcing precocity upon him. And he said to me on his 19th birthday, "I read that book you gave me 11 years, Dad. Still doesn't make sense now." But at least he'd read it. I think the importance of World Book Night and the importance of books themselves have been reflected in the calibre of readers, writers and people we have gathered together tonight across the country. Our following guest has written 24 books. The Times named him one of the top 50 British post-war writers. When I asked him back in the wings what number he was, he had genuinely no idea. So modest is the man. If I were to list his awards, we'd be here till next World Book Night. Somebody pinch me afterwards when I tell you that we have Ian Banks reading from The Player of Games.
Evening all. Yes, I'm going to be reading from my own work. This could be ascribed to naked shamelessness, really, I suppose. It's more to do with the fact I'm an absolutely terrible reader-outerer of writing-ness stuff. So, working on the sound principle that if you're going to massacre somebody's prose, you should really be massacring your own, I thought I'd just read from the very start of the aforesaid Player of Games. But be warned, it is science fiction, so it's got some weird stuff in it. On the other hand, it's only about 3.5 minutes of torture for those of you who hate it that much. This is the story of a man who went far away for a long time, just to play a game. The man is a game player called Gurgi. The story starts with a battle that is not a battle, and ends with a game that is not a game. Me? I'll tell you about me later. This is how the story begins. Dust drifted with each footstep. He limped across the desert, following the suited figure in front. The gun was quiet in his hands. They must be nearly there. The noise of distant surf boomed through the helmet sound field. They were approaching a tall dune from which they ought to be able to see the coast. Somehow he had survived. He had not expected to. It was bright and hot and dry outside, but inside the suit he was shielded from the sun and the baking air, cosseted and cool. One edge of the helmet visor was dark, but it had taken a hit, and the right leg flexed awkwardly, also damaged, making him limp. But otherwise, he'd been lucky. The last time they'd been attacked had been a kilometre back, and now they were nearly out of range. The flight of missiles cleared the nearest ridge in a glittering arc. He saw them late because of the damaged visor. He thought the missiles had already started firing, but it was only the sunlight reflecting on their sleek bodies. The flight dipped and swung together like a flock of birds. When they did start firing, it was signaled by strobing red pulses of light. He raised his gun to fire back. The other suited figures in the group had already started firing. Some dived to the dusty desert floor, others dropped to one knee. He was the only one standing. The missiles swerved again, turned all at once, and then splitting up to take different directions. Dust puffed around his feet as shots fell close. He tried to aim at one of the small machines, but they moved startlingly quickly, and the gun felt large and awkward in his hands. His suit chimed over the distant noise of firing and the shouts of the other people. Lights winked inside the helmet, detailing the damage. The suit shook, and his right leg went suddenly numb. "Wake up, Gurgi!" Ye laughed alongside him. She swiveled on one knee as two of the small missiles swung suddenly at their section of the group, sensing this was where it was weakest. Gurgi saw the machines coming, but the gun sang wildly in his hands, and he seemed always to be aiming at where the missiles had just been. The two machines darted for the space between him and Ye. One of the missiles flashed once and disintegrated. Ye shouted, exulting. The other missile swung between them. She lashed out with it, with her foot trying to kick it. Gurgi turned awkwardly to fire at it, accidentally scattering fire over Ye's chute as she did so. He heard her cry out and then curse. She staggered but brought the gun round. Fountains of dust burst around the second missile as it turned to face them again, its red pulsive light lighting up his suit and filling his visor with darkness. He felt numb from the neck down and crumpled to the ground. It went very black and very quiet. "You are dead," a crisp little voice informed him. He lay on the unseen desert floor. He could hear distant muffled noises, sense vibrations from the ground. He heard his own heart beat and the ebb and flow of his breath. He tried to hold his breathing and slow his heart, but he was paralyzed, imprisoned, without control. His nose itched. It was impossible to scratch it. "What am I doing here?" he thought. Thank you.
Sorry, absolutely without a word of a lie, I was just watching that on a wee monitor in the back, and one of our sound technicians was speaking to one of our guests about a Spanish book the sound technician was reading. There's a conversation happening about books that aren't even on any list tonight. It's really exciting back there. Next, you probably remember in the introduction that America is having World Book Night for the first time, which is something we really ought to celebrate for numerous reasons. Nice the telepathy's still working. So many things I want to say. And earlier today, I pre-recorded on Skype, no less, an interview with Neil Gaiman. Neil is obviously a Newbery and Carnegie Award-winning writer, and he's co-written with Terry Pratchett the World Book Night selection, Good Omens. And this is what we recorded earlier.
Yes.
Are you ready, Neil?
I am.
Can I just say, sir, how bright-eyed and bushy-tailed you're looking in the Midwest of America? Tell me, it's the first time World Book Night has hit America. How is it unfolding now?
I think that the best thing about World Book Night hitting America, for me anyway, is I no longer have to be embarrassed when I talk about World Book Night to Americans and they go, "I've never heard of it, how world can it be?" And I go, "No, it's really world, it just doesn't include America." And now they've embraced it.
It's worth mentioning to them that the World Series of baseball doesn't really extend beyond their own borders. Now, interestingly, in the book you've written with Terry Pratchett, Good Omens, each of the authors have chosen a chapter from another book as if to throw forward to potential beyond simply the books shortlisted. You've chosen a G.K. Chesterton chapter. Can you tell me why?
Not only can I not tell you why, I don't even remember which chapter I picked. Isn't that cool? This was one of those wonderful, magical moments where somebody emailed me 3 months ago and said, pick something. And I went, okay, and I did. What did I pick? Remind me. And
I don't know, because I don't have a copy of that book in front of me. However, we have a beautiful opportunity, Neil, to say, is there another chapter by another writer you might choose? Why not have two for the price of one?
Oh,
what are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? I'm currently reading bundles of books by friends that have not been published yet. They keep sending me to them. And in the old days, you actually had to wait until they at least had advanced copies. Now they send you things and you start reading them on your iPad or your Kindle. So I'm reading a novel by Mitch Benn that won't be published for another 6-8 months. I'm reading a wonderful novel. Yeah, it's very, very strange. People just send you books, and then you try desperately to read them.
And do you find you read differently now that you're perhaps reading on an iPad or a Kindle or something? Does the pattern of your reading change?
I don't think the passion changes. I still love having a book to hold, and I still love traveling, always, with some kind of book that's actually going to be something that I can hold on to. What I do find I'm doing now, using things like Kindle software, is I'm reading more enormous books that I have always put off, because now I can have the book wherever I am. And they tend to be the kinds of books that I bought and gave up on carrying around with me, like The Count of Monte Cristo. I finally finished The Count of Monte Cristo because it was on my phone, my iPad, my Kindle.
Whatever you do, let's not spoil the ending.
The butler did it to The Count of Monte Cristo.
And
with a candlestick.
To pick one book yourself, Neil, to give away, what would you pick? What would you want to share a million other readers? What was that?
Joy...
Indian Takeaway? No, I'm joking.
I think for me, the joy of books is that it would probably change from day to day, and it also changes depending on what the person is. The fun of giving away books is that point where you start talking to a person and suddenly realizing the book they've never read that they need, and running down and going and finding it, whether it's an obscure book by a forgotten author like Thorne Smith or Hope Merleys, or you're finding a huge bestseller that you think they should have read. I was in Dallas last week where my wife was mixing her record and wound up telling everybody in Dallas that they have to read this 2263 novel by Stephen King, his Oswald assassination book, which is a huge bestseller, but lots of people hadn't read. And I loved what he said about Dallas and started pressing it on everybody.
Well, listen, have a good rest of the day there. I suspect you have a few more hours of World Book Night than we do. Thank you very much for talking to us, Neil.
Thank you. It's been a fun world morning.
Neil Gaiman there. For any kids watching, that was actually his own personal library. So, you can get rich by playing football or writing books. I was wearing a hooded top there. I do that just to confuse people. I have no inherent need for the hood. I'm very chuffed. Our next our reader is another friend of mine, founder of the hip-hop Shakespeare company, who'll be performing later in the front room and at the Riverside stage, because the evening goes on till much later. Tonight he's going to perform a monologue from Shakespeare's Richard II. Ladies and gentlemen, Akala.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everybody's well. I do have a little bit of a cold and some sniffles, so if I do happen to sniff, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to be reading from Richard II, Act 5, Scene 5. I have been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. And for because the world is populous, and here is not a creature but myself, I cannot do it, yet I'll hammer it out. My brain I prove the female to my soul the father, and these two beget a generation of still breeding thoughts. And these same thoughts people this little world, in humours like the people of this world, for no thought is contented. The better sort, as thoughts of things divine are intermixed with scruples, and do set the word itself against the word. And thus, come little ones, and then again it is as hard for a camel to thread the postern of a small needle's eye. Thoughts tending to ambition, they do plot unlikely wonders, how these vain, weak nails may tear a passage through the flinty ribs of this hard world, my ragged prison walls. And for they cannot die in their own pride. Thoughts tending to content flatter themselves that they are not the first of fortune's slaves, nor shall to be the last, like silly beggars who sitting in the stocks refuge their shame that many have and others must sit here. And in thought they find a kind of ease, bearing their own misfortunes on the back of such as have endured the like. Thus I play in one person many people, and none contented. Sometimes I am king, then treason makes me wish myself a beggar, and so I am. Then crushing penury persuades me I was better when a king, and then I am kinged again, and by think that I am unkinged by Bolingbroke, and straight am nothing. But whatever I be, nor I, nor any man, but that man is. With nothing shall be pleased, till he be eased with being nothing. Music do I hear? Music. Ha, ha, keep time. How sweet sour music is, when time is broke and no proportion kept. So it is the music of men's lives. And here I have the daintiness of ear, to check time broke in a disordered string. But for the concord of my state and time had not an ear to hear true time broke. I wasted time, and now time does waste me. For now have time made me this numbering clock. My thoughts are minutes, and with sighs they jar their watches into mine eyes, the outward watch whereunto my finger, like a dial's point, is pointing still, in cleansing them from tears. Now, sir, the sound that tells what hour it is are clamorous groans which strike upon my heart, which the bell is. So sighs and tears and groans show minutes, times, and hours. But my time runs, posting on in Bolingbroke's proud joy, while I stand fooling here this jack o' the clock. This music mads me, let it sound no more. For though it have hope madmen to their wits, in me it seems it will make wise men mad. For 'tis a sign of love, and to Richard is a strange brooch in this all-hating world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. The Hip Hop Shakespeare Company have just come back from the Philippines and Indonesia and returning there, taking the word of Shakespeare. Next, we have Jon Ronson. How best to describe Jon Ronson? Broadcaster, humorist, novelist, and now retired poker player. He's written many books, including The Men Who Stare at Ghosts, which starred George Clooney. And whatever Jon says, George Clooney was not playing him in the film, much as he wishes he was. His latest book, The Psychopath Test, is currently in the bestseller list. Jon made me say that. He's reading from a previously unread work. Ladies and gentlemen, Jon Ronson.
Hello. Hi. I'm not going to read from the Psychopath Test. I've chosen against it. Instead, I'm just going to read a very short story that I never put in a book because it was too painful to, but I feel strong enough to read it now. This happened 7 years ago. My 6-year-old son Joel comes into my office to ask me if there's a worse swear word than fuck. No, I say. You're lying, he says. There's none worse than fuck, I say. Joel narrows his eyes. I know you're lying, he says. He leaves the room. On Saturday, I take Joel to Chessington World of Adventures. What a crap theme park. Nonetheless, we have a wonderful day together. You're a great dad, Joel says as we drive home. And you're a great son, I reply with a magical twinkle. We smile lovingly at each other. There is a worse swear word than fuck, isn't there, says Joel. Yes, there is, I say. What is it, asks Joel. I say. Tell me, says Joel. I swear this is just for me. I'll never use it. I just need to know. I will never use it on anyone, I swear. Just tell me. I feel clammy and hemmed in. And you won't tell Mum we had this conversation? I promise, says Joel. Mum will never know. There's a silence. I can't tell you, I say. Tell me, says Joel. I can't, I say. Then why did you almost tell me? Joel yells. Because I wasn't thinking responsibly, I yell. I was swept up in the magic of the moment. You have to tell me, Joel says. It's only fair. I say. I look around the car. For some reason, we have an old can of Italian lemonade down on the floor. It's Lemon, I say. Lemon, says Joel. That's the worst swear word of all, I say. Lemon. But I'm holding you to your promise that you will never use it. Okay? Never. Lemon, says Joel. He seems disappointed. There's nowhere to go after Lemon, I say. Lemon is the Everest peak of swearing. Joel looks out of the window. You know, I say wisely. Sometimes the mystery is better than the knowing, wouldn't you say? Sometimes the journey is better than the destination. Anyway, don't tell Mum. We reach the house. Joel rushes inside. Mum, he yells. Dad just told me the worst swear word of all. I know what it is. Lemon. My wife Elaine appears at the top of the stairs, an inscrutable expression on her face. It wasn't inscrutable. I shrug anxiously. A month passes. We go for a weekend away. At the hotel, a boy on a tricycle crashes into Joel. Lemon, he mutters. Another month passes. Joel has a friend round for a sleepover. At 11 p.m, I hear them talking. They're saying, Lemon. I feel terrible about this, I say to Elaine. I tricked my own son. I'm going to tell him that lemon isn't a swear word and is in fact the Italian word for lemon. I'm going to tell him the actual worst swear word in the world. You are not, says Elaine. I'd rather he was foul-mouthed and accurate than see him like this, I say. All because of my stupid slip of the tongue in the car on the way back from Chessington World of Adventures. You are not going to tell Joel the worst swear word in the world, Elaine yells. And so I don't. Today, Joel comes into my office. Hi, he says. Hi, I say. There's a silence. Anyway, I'll see you later, says Joel. He goes to leave. Then he turns around. Oh, he says, cunt. Thank you.
Brilliant, Jon Ronson. I should explain, Jon and I have known each other for a couple of decades, and he didn't tell me to say his book was on the bestseller list, but I did it just to annoy him. And on the way out, he whispered in my ear, "You're a lemon." Our next author has written 5 novels, most recently, There Is No Dog. And Meg Rosoff reads from her book, How I Live Now, one of this year's World Book Night selections. Ladies and gentlemen, Meg Rosoff.
Figures I have to follow Jon Ronson. None of those words in this book. I'm going to just read you a little bit from the beginning of How I Live Now. And the only thing I feel I should tell you before I start is that I wrote the book when I was still working in advertising, which was a career that I really loathed. And the very first chapter, very, very short, my chapters are really short, I wrote on the back of a checkbook on a bus on the way home from work one day. And the only thing that would make me happier tonight is if this whole audience was full of advertising people who were saying, I wish we got to do what she does for a living. So here we go. My name is Elizabeth, but no one ever calls me that. My father took one look at me when I was born and must have thought I had the face of someone dignified and sad, like an old-fashioned queen or a dead person. But what I turned out like is plain, not much there to notice. Even my life so far has been plain, more Daisy than Elizabeth from the word go. But the summer I went to England to stay with my cousins, everything changed. Part of that was because of the war, which supposedly changed lots of things. But I can't remember much about life before the war anyway, so it doesn't count in this book. Mostly everything changed because of Edmund, and so here's what happened. I'm coming off the plane, and I'll tell you why that is later, and landing at London Airport, and I'm looking around for a middle-aged kind of woman who I've seen in pictures, who's my Aunt Pen. The photographs are out of date, but she looked like the type who would wear a big necklace and flat shoes, and maybe some kind of narrow dress in black or gray. But I'm just guessing since the pictures only ever showed her face. Anyway, I'm looking, and everyone's leaving, and there's no signal on my phone, and I'm thinking, oh, great. I'm going to be abandoned at the airport, so that's 2 countries they don't want me in. When I notice everyone's gone except for this kid who comes up to me and says, you must be Daisy. And when I look relieved, he does too, and he says, I'm Edmund. Hello, Edmund, I say. Nice to meet you. Then I look at him hard to try to get a feel for what my new life with my cousins might be like. Now, let me tell you what he looks like before I forget, because it's not exactly what you'd expect from your average 14-year-old. What with the cigarette and hair that looks like he cut it himself with a hatchet in the dead of night. But aside from that, he's exactly like some kind of mutt. You know the ones you see at the dog shelter, who are kind of hopeful and sweet, and put their nose straight into your hand when they meet you with a certain kind of dignity, and you know from that second that you're going to take him home. Well, that's him, only he took me home. I'll take your bag, he said, and even though he's about half a mile shorter than me and has arms about as thick as a dog leg, he grabs my bag and I grab it back and say, where's your mom? Is she in the car? And he smiles and takes a drag on his cigarette. And even though I know smoking kills and all that, I think it's a little bit cool. But maybe all the kids in England smoke cigarettes? I don't say anything in case it's a well-known fact that the smoking age in England is something like 12. And by making a big thing about it, I'll end up looking like an idiot when I've only been here 5 minutes. Anyway, he says, Mum couldn't come to the airport because she's working, and it's not worth anyone's life to interrupt her when she's working. And everyone else was somewhere else, so I drove here myself. I looked at him funny then. You drove here yourself? You drove here yourself? Yeah, well, and I'm the Duchess of Panama's private secretary. And then he gave a little shrug and a little dog-sheltered dog kind of tilt of his head, and he pointed at a falling-apart black Jeep, and he opened the door by reaching in through the window, which was open. And he threw my bags in the back, and more like pushed them in because they were pretty heavy. And he said, get in, Cousin Daisy. And there was nothing else I could think of to do, so I got in. I'm still trying to get my head around all this when instead of following the signs that say exit, he turns the car up onto the grass and then drives across with a sign that says, do not enter. And of course he enters. And then he jogs left across a ditch and suddenly we're out on the highway. Can you believe what they charge just to park there for an hour, he says to me. Well, to be fair, there's no way I'm believing any of this, being driven along on the wrong side of the road by a skinny kid dragging on a cigarette. And let's face it, who wouldn't be thinking what a weird place England is? And then he looked at me again in his funny doggy way, and he said, you'll get used to it. Which was strange, too, because I hadn't said anything out loud. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Sorry, you may have noticed I was a beat and a half late coming on there because I was very busy talking to our next reader about food. and very particularly an andana kofta, which is a particular type of Turkish kofta, which I would walk over broken glass merely to smell a good one. I may have given her background away. Elif Shafak was a French-born Turkish writer who writes in both English and Turkish, and she's one of Turkey's leading novelists. I suppose defined in a sense by her lack of fear in asking difficult questions, and I think around the world in the last year or so we've seen that it's not easy to ask difficult questions. She's been translated into 30 different languages, and she's reading from her new novel, which is set in the UK, Honour, published in the UK by Penguin. Ladies and gentlemen, Elif Shafak.
Good evening. So here's a little excerpt from my new novel, Honour. My mother died twice. I promised myself I would not let her story be forgotten, but I could never find the time or the will or the courage to write about it. That is, until recently. I don't think I'll ever become a real writer, and that's quite all right now. I've reached an age at which I am more at peace with my limitations and failures. But I had to tell this story, even if only to one person. I had to send it into some corner of the universe where it could float freely away from us. I owed it to Mum, this freedom, and I had to finish it this year before he was released from prison. When that day arrives, I will be in front of the prison building, waiting for him to come out. I don't know how long this will take, and I don't know how he will react when he sees me. I haven't visited him for more than a year. I used to go regularly, but as the day of his release drew closer, I just stopped. At some point, the massive door will open from inside, and he will walk out. He will gaze up at the overcast sky, unused to seeing this vast expanse above his head after 14 years of incarceration. I imagine him blinking at the daylight, like a creature of the dark. In the meantime, I'll stay put, counting up to 10, or 100, or 3,000. We won't embrace, we won't shake hands, a mutual nod, and the thinnest of greetings in small, strangulated voices. He'll hop into the car. I'll be surprised to see how athletic he is. He's still a young man, after all. There have been many times when I thought of killing him. I've made elaborate plans that involved guns, poison, or better yet, a flick knife, a poetic justice of sorts. I've also thought of forgiving him, fully and truly. In the end, I haven't achieved either. Should he want to have a cigarette, I won't object, even though I hate the smell and don't let my husband smoke in the car or in the house. We'll drive across the English countryside, passing through quiet meadows and open fields. I will have brought a cassette along to play, the greatest hits of ABBA, all the songs that my mother used to hum while cooking or cleaning. Take a chance on me, Mamma Mia, Dancing Queen. For she will be watching us, I'm sure. Mothers don't go to heaven when they die. They get special permission from God to stay around a bit longer and watch over their children, no matter what has passed between them in their brief mortal lives. Back in London, I'll search for a parking space, grumbling to myself. Finally, I'll find a spot into which I'll squeeze the car after a dozen maneuvers. I can deceive myself that I'm a good driver until it comes to parking. I wonder if he will scoff at me for being a typical woman driver. He would have done so once. We will walk together towards the house, the street quiet and bright behind and ahead of us. For a fleeting moment, we will compare our surroundings with our old home in Hackney, marveling at how different things seem now and how time has moved forward, even when we couldn't. Once inside, we will take off our shoes and put on slippers. From the doorway, he will watch me make tea, which I will serve without milk and with lots of sugar, that is, if jail hasn't changed his habits. Then I will take out the sesame halva. We will sit together by the window with porcelain cups and plates in our hands like genteel strangers watching it rain on the flowers in my back garden. He will compliment me on my cooking, saying how much he has missed sesame halva, though he will politely decline another serving. I will tell him I follow Mum's recipe to the letter, but it never turns out as good as hers. That will shut him up. We will lock gazes, the silence heavy in the air. Then he will excuse himself, saying that he feels tired and would like to rest, if that's all right. I will show him to his room and close the door slowly. I will leave him there, in a room in my house, neither far away nor too close. I will keep him confined within those four walls, between the hate and the love, none of which I can help but feel, forever trapped in a box in my heart. He's my brother, he, a murderer. Thank you.
That'll be the hairs on the back of my neck then. That was beautiful, thank you, Elif. Next, we have Colin Salmon. Many of you will know has brought his acting talents to countless TV and film roles, including Woody Allen's Match Point. He's reading tonight from many people's sort of favourite book of all time. It's Ishiguro's 2012 World Book Night nomination, Remains of the Day. Please welcome Colin Salmon, Shepherd's Bush's finest.
Loyalty, professionalism, isolation. Stevens has a quandary: how to banter, how to have jokes and fun with his employer. There was a time where he would be able to discuss this with his compatriots, and this is the extract describing that time. Not so long ago, if any points of ambiguity arose regarding one's duties, one had the comfort of knowing that before long some fellow professional whose opinion one respected would be accompanying his employer to the house, and there would be ample opportunity to discuss the matter. And of course, during Lord Darlington's days, when ladies and gentlemen would often visit for many days on end, it was possible to develop a good understanding with visiting colleagues. Indeed, in those busy days, our servants' hall would often witness a gathering of some of the finest professionals in England, talking late into the night by the warmth of the fire. And let me tell you, if you were to have come into our servants' hall on any of those evenings, you would not have heard mere gossip. More likely, you would have witnessed debates over the great affairs preoccupying our employers upstairs, or else over matters of import reported in the newspapers. And, of course, as fellow professionals from all walks of life are wont to do when gathered together, we could be found discussing every aspect of our vocation. Sometimes, naturally, there would be strong disagreements. But more often than not, the atmosphere was dominated by a feeling of mutual respect. Perhaps I will convey a better idea of the tone of those evenings if I say that regular visitors included the likes of Mr. Harry Graham, valet butler to Sir James Chambers, Mr. John Donalds, valet to Mr. Sidney Dickinson, and there were others less distinguished perhaps, but whose lively presence made any visit memorable. We were all essentially cut from the same cloth, so to speak. Not the way it is today, when on the rare occasion an employee accompanies a guest here, he is likely to be some newcomer who has little to say about anything other than association football, and who prefers to pass the evening not by the fire of the servants' hall, but drinking at the Ploughman's Arms, or indeed, as seems increasingly likely nowadays, at the Star Inn. But let me return to the question that is of genuine interest. This question we so enjoyed debating when our evenings were not spoiled by chatter from those who lacked any fundamental understanding of the profession. That is to say, the question, what is a great butler? To the best of my knowledge, for all the talk this question has engendered over the years, there have been very few attempts within the profession to formulate an official answer. The only instances that come to mind is the attempt of the Hay Society to devise criteria for membership. The Hay Society claimed to admit butlers of only the very first rank. Much of the power and prestige it went on to gain derived from the fact that, unlike other such organisations which have come and gone, it managed to keep its numbers extremely low, thus giving this claim some credibility. Membership, it was said, never at any point rose above 30, and much of the time remained closer to 9 or 10. It is sometimes said that butlers only truly exist in England. Other countries, whatever title is actually used, have only manservants. I tend to believe this is true. Continentals are unable to be butlers because they are, as a breed, incapable of the emotional restraint which only the English race are capable of. Continentals, and by and large the Celts, as you will no doubt agree, are as a rule unable to control themselves in moments of strong emotion and are thus unable to maintain a professional demeanour other than in the least challenging of situations. They are like a man who will, at the slightest provocation, tear off his suit and his shirt and run about screaming. In a word, dignity is beyond such persons. We English have an important advantage over foreigners in this respect, and it is for this reason that when you think of a great butler, he is bound, almost by definition, to be an Englishman.
Colin, Salmon, for those of you watching in Bristol, Newcastle, Birmingham, Edinburgh and the like on the video streaming, don't adjust your screens. He really is that good looking. Now, I studied law at Glasgow University, and in the library at Glasgow University, the law floor had the second most thefts of books. Absolutely true. You're probably wondering which floor held the record for the most thieved from book department. It was, of course, divinity. To err is to human, to R is to be a pirate. Why am I telling you this? Because our next writer holds the record for being the most stolen writer in Britain, which is unsurprising when you consider she's a best-selling author of 18 novels. I imagine she could fill this space tenfold. And that's probably just on stolen books. Her book, The Take, is one of this year's World Book Night titles. It's a genuine pleasure. Instead of reading, we're going to have a quick chat with Martina Cole, ladies and gentlemen. How are you?
I'm good.
Now, I was going to ask you, how did it feel to have your book selected? It's not a feeling many writers have.
I've got to be honest, it was a fantastic feeling, and I was glad that it was The Take.
Why?
Because I think The Take was such a great television series, so I was hoping that anyone who watched the series and didn't read might go and pick the book up and enjoy the book and read some other books.
Because, as I mentioned earlier on, 500,000 books are being sent directly to prisons and places like hard-to-reach places. But for 20 years now, you've been working as a kind of creative writer mentor in prisons. How is that experience? What made you at that point decide to go and visit prisons?
It was when we were filming The Jump, many, many years ago. We filmed in Wandsworth Prison, and one of the POs said, would you please come in and talk to our guys? Because, you know, very few people come in. And I said yes, and it was a crowd of lifers. And it just went from there. Everyone was saying, oh, come back in. So I started doing creative writing classes. I've always believed that, you know, when people are sentenced and been put in prison, I don't believe they should get a second sentence. You know, I think they should have as much help as possible to come out and be, you know, good mention, you know, good people in society.
Which is interesting you should mention that, because I don't know if you know, we had a story that a prisoner in North Allerton got his mum signed him up to be a giver, and he came out of prison after a 2-year stretch and ended up giving copies of The Take to people he knew. So, I mean, it's kind of what goes around comes around, I suppose.
It's a great compliment. I mean, oftentimes people say to me, I started reading your books in prison. Normally I get Funky Brixton, is the main one. But I think it's great. I think, you know, when years ago in Wandsworth, we'd done this huge big thing, and it had a big poster, and it said Escape with a novel. And I had my book on there, The Jump. But so many men bought The Jump because they obviously thought it was a sex book, but it wasn't actually. It was about a prison breakout.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because Jamie Bing, our very own Jamie Bing, spent the afternoon in Wormwood Scrubs, and he goes back in the morning, I believe, to finish his sentence. That's a joke. You were so good at the beginning. Well, listen, Martina, thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. Much. And your books will be circulating even more so, and you don't need to steal them. Just ask someone to give it to you. Thanks a lot, Martina.
Thank you. Good night.
I mean, knowing Jamie, he probably is going back to the Scrubs in the morning because he'll have made half a dozen friends there. Now, we didn't realise this when we put the running order together. It just so happens there's a link between Martina and our next reader, Owen Teale. Owen won a Tony Award for Doll's House amongst numerous other accolades for stage and screen. And apart from having a voice like liquid gold, Owen appeared in Dangerous Lady, which was adapted for television in 1992, one of Martina's books. He's reading from this year's World Book Night title, David Peace's absolutely brilliant Damned United.
I am a Yorkshire man, and I'm a cunning man, and I curse you. First with gift, then with loss. I curse you. Loss, and then gift. Gift, and then loss. Until you lose. Until you leave. I will curse you. Day one. I see it from the motorway. Through the windscreen. The kids in the back. Fallen off the top of Beeston Hill. Are we nearly there yet, they're saying? Are we nearly there, Dad? In a heap, up against the railway and the motorway banking. Asking me about Billy Bremner and Johnny Giles. The floodlights and the stands, all fingers and fists up from the sticks and the stones, the flesh and the bones. There it is. My eldest is telling my youngest, there it is, from the motorway, through the windscreen. Hateful, hateful place. Spiteful, spiteful place. Elland Road, Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. I've seen it before, been here before. Played and managed here 6 or 7 times in 6 or 7 years. Always a visitor, always away. Hateful, spiteful place, flecked in their phlegm. But not today. Wednesday, 31st of July, 1974, Arthur Seaton, Colin Smith, Arthur Machin and Joe Lampton. Today, I'm no longer a visitor. No longer away, no more zombies, they whisper. No more bloody zombies, Brian. Today, I'm on my way to work there. Off the motorway, the southwest urban motorway, round the bends, the corners, to the junction with Lowfields Road, onto Elland Road. Sharp right and through the gates, into the ground, the West Stand car park, the kids hopping up and down on the back seat. No place to park. No place reserved. The press, the cameras and the lights, the fans, the autograph books and the pens. I open the door. I do up my cuffs. The rain in our hair. I get out my jacket out of the back. I put it on. My eldest and my youngest hiding behind me. The rain in our faces. The hills behind us. The houses and the flats. The ground in front of us. The stands and the lights. Across the car park, the potholes and the puddles, this one big bloke pushing his way through the press. The cameras and the lights, the fans. The black hair and the white skin, the red eyes and the sharpened teeth. You're bloody late, he shouts. Finger in my face, I look at the press, the cameras and the lights, the fans, the autograph books and the pens. My boys behind me, the rain in our hair, in all our faces sunned and tanned, their faces pallid and wan. I look this one big bloke in his eye, I move his finger out of my face and tell him, it's got naught to do with you whether I'm bloody late or not. Thank you.
Owen Teale, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone who thinks The Damned United is a book just about football probably thinks my mum's lamb curry is just food. Next we have Kathy Lett, probably our favourite Australian, who describes herself as a full-time mother and demented writer. Oh, sorry, full-time writer and demented mother. She's also been a singer, a playwright and a TV writer. Tonight she reads from, well, would any evening of reading be complete without a little bit of Dorothy Parker? Kathy Lett. Sorry.
Good evening, members of the literati and the cliterati, of course. All the girls are here. I'm going to read tonight from my favourite author, Dorothy Parker. And she had a wit so sharp you could shave your legs with it. And I know you're a nation of Eeyores. I know you think optimism's some kind of eye disease. But if ever you're feeling down and depressed, this poem I'm about to read you will definitely cheer you up. It's called Resume. Razors pain you. Rivers are damp. Acids stain you. Drugs cause cramp. Guns aren't lawful. Nooses give. Gas smells awful. You might as well live. Isn't she great? And now this is her take, her caustic take on love. It's a short poem called Comment. Oh, life is a glorious cycle of song, a medley of extemporanea, and love is a thing that can never go wrong. And I am Marie of Romania. This is called Indian Summer. In youth, it was a way I had to do my best to please and change with every passing lad to suit his theories. But now I know the things I know and do the things I do. And if you do not like me so, to hell, my love, with you. And now finally, a little tiny poem called Sanctuary. The land is bare of chattering folk. The clouds are low along the ridges, and sweets the air with curly smoke from all my burning bridges. Bye.
Kathy Lett. I think my two favourite Dorothy Parker quotes are, she broke her leg sliding down some barrister, and she's fluent in 18 languages and can't say no in any of them. Please welcome our next award-winning novelist and essayist, Jeff Dyer, whose newest book, Zona, is about Tarkovsky's film, The Stalker, or as Jamie Bing told me beforehand, it's a book about a film about a journey to a room. Tonight, Jeff reads Billy Collins' poem, Marginalia. Jeff Dyer.
Hi everybody. I haven't got very long, so I thought it was important to choose something with short words. Billy Collins' poem, I thought it was also important to, on World Book Night, to read a poem about books. So here we have, Marginalia by Billy Collins. Sometimes the notes are ferocious, skirmishes against the author, raging along the borders of every page in tiny black script. If I could just get my hands on you, Kierkegaard or Connor Cruise O'Brien, they seem to say, I would bolt the door and beat some logic into your head. Other comments are more offhand, dismissive. Nonsense, please, ha, that kind of thing. I remember once looking up from my reading, my thumb as a bookmark, trying to imagine what the person must look like who wrote, "Don't be a ninny," alongside a paragraph in The Life of Emily Dickinson. Students are more modest, needing to leave only their splayed footprints along the shore of the page. One scrawls metaphor next to a stanza of Eliot's. Another notes the presence of irony 50 times outside the paragraphs of A Modest Proposal. Or they are fans who cheer from the empty bleachers, hands cupped around their mouths. Absolutely, they shout to Duns Scotus and James Baldwin. Yes, bullseye, my man. Check marks, asterisks, and exclamation points rain down along the sidelines. And if you have ever managed to graduate from college without ever having written man versus nature in a margin, perhaps now is the time to take one step forward. We have all seized the white perimeter as our own and reached for a pen, if only to show we did not just laze in an armchair turning pages. We pressed a thought into the wayside, planted an impression along the verge. Even Irish monks in their cold scriptoria jotted along the borders of the Gospels brief asides about the pains of copying, a bird singing near their window, or the sunlight that illuminated their page. Anonymous men catching a ride into the future on a vessel more lasting than themselves. And you have not read Joshua Reynolds, they say, until you have read him enwreathed with Blake's furious scribbling. Yet the one I think of most often, the one that dangles from me like a locket, was written in the copy of Catcher in the Rye I borrowed from the local library one slow, hot summer. I was just beginning high school then, reading books on a Davenport in my parents' living room. And I cannot tell you how vastly my loneliness was deepened, how poignant and amplified the world before me seemed, when I found on one page a few greasy-looking smears, and next to them, written in soft pencil, by a beautiful girl I could tell whom I would never meet. Pardon the egg salad stains, but I'm in love. Thanks very much. Good night.
Thank you, Jeff Dyer there, reading from Billy Collins' poem, Marginalia. Again, another writer whose book is many people's favourite of all time. Andrea Levy's Small Island is a best-selling novel and selected for this year's World Book Night. She told me before the show that her reading lasts 3 minutes, 53 seconds. So let's all time her. I'm only joking. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to invite on stage Andrea Levy.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to read from Small Island. I'm going to read a bit from Gilbert. Gilbert was a Jamaican volunteer in the RAF during the Second World War. At the end of the war, he was demobbed back to Jamaica, and then he came back to England. And this is where he first arrives in England after his demob. Gilbert. You see, most of the boys were looking upwards. Their feet might have been stepping on London soil for the first time, their shaking sea legs wobbling them on the steadfast land, but it was wonder that lifted their eyes. They finally arrive in London town, and let me tell you, the mother country, this thought I knew you place, was bewildering these Jamaican boys. See them pointing at the train that rumbles across a bridge? They looked shocked when billowing black smoke puffed its way around the whitewashing hung on drying lines, the sheets, the pants, the babies' bonnets. Come, they had never seen houses so tall, all the same. And what is that? A chimney? They have fire in their house in England? No. And why everything looks so dowdy? Even the sunshine can find no colour but grey. Staring on people who were staring on them. Man, the women look so glum. Traffic turning their head this way and that. Steady there, boy, watch out. Look, you see a white man driving a bus, and over there, can you believe what the eye is telling? A white man sweeping the road. But this old RAF volunteer had seen it all before during the war. So I was looking down, unlike them big-eyed newcomer boys. I just arrived back in England, and there on the pavement before me, I spy a brooch. What a piece of good fortune. What a little bit of luck. Lying lost, this precious oval jewel shimmered the radiant, iridescent green of a hummingbird caught by the sun. My Auntie Corinne would have raised her hands to the heaven to call it a sign. Now, these were the thoughts that passed through my head in the 3 steps it took me to reach that brooch. 1, perhaps it fall from a young woman's coat. Sure, so my blessing is another's misfortune. 2, it is an old woman that lose it from her purse. Maybe the police station was the proper place to take it. And 3, Hortense. This deep green brooch would look so pretty on her. I conjured an image in me mind. See me take the sparkling brooch to pin it to her dress, near her neck, against her smooth nut brown skin. And look, see her touch the pin, then tilt her head to charm a smile on me. So all this rumination is taking place as I move closer. I was about to bend my knee so I could reach the brooch when hear this. It flew away. Black flecks suddenly pitting the air. That jewel was no more than a cluster of flies caught by the light. The radiant iridescent green, the movement of their squabbling backs. My eyes no longer believed what they saw, for after the host of flies flew, they left me with just the small piece of brown dog shit they had all gathered on. Was this a sign? Maybe. For one of the big-eyed newcomer boys walked straight along and stepped right in the muck.
Brilliant. Is it any wonder so many people love that book? Our next reader and writer was the most popular book from last year's list. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime was on the 2011 World Book Night list. And Mark Haddon read last year in Trafalgar Square. This year is the first public reading of his brand new novel, The Opening of the Red House, which will be published on May the 10th, 2012. So this is a little bit special. He also changed my elder brother's attitude towards reading, so I have that to thank him for. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Haddon.
Cooling towers and sewage farms, Finstock, Charlbury, Ascot under Wychwood, 70 miles per hour, the train unzips the fields. 2 gun-grey lines besides the river's meander. Flashes of sun on the hammered metal, something of steam about it even now. Hogwarts and Addlestrop, the night mail crossing the border. Cheyenne sweeping down from the ridge. Delta Blues from the boxcar. Somewhere, those secret points that might just switch and send you curving into a world of uniformed porters and great aunts and summers at the lake. Angela leant against the cold window, hypnotized by the power lines as they sagged and were scooped up by the next gantry over and over and over. Polytunnels like silver mattresses, indecipherable swirls of graffiti on a brick siding. She'd buried her mother 6 weeks ago. A bearded man in a suit with shiny elbows playing Danny Boy on Northumbrian pipes. Everything out of kilter. The bandage on the vicar's hand, that woman chasing her wind-blown hat between the headstones, the dog that belonged to no one. She thought her mother had left the world a long way back. The weekly visits, mostly for Angela's own benefit. Boiled mutton, classic FM, and a commode in flesh-coloured plastic. Her death should have been a relief. Then the first spade of earth hit the coffin, a bubble rose in her chest, and she realized her mother had been, what? A cornerstone? A breakwater? The week after the funeral, Dominic had been standing at the sink, bottle brushing the green vase. The last of the freak snow was still packed down the side of the shed, and the rotary washing line was turning in the wind. Angela came in holding the phone as if it was a mystery object she'd found on the hall table. That was Richard. Dominic upended the vase on the wire rack. And what did he want? He's offered to take us on holiday. He dried his hands on the tea towel. Are we talking about your brother or some entirely different Richard? We are indeed talking about my brother. He really had no idea what to say. Angela and Richard had spent no more than an afternoon in each other's company over the last 15 years, and their meeting at the funeral had seemed perfunctory at best. Where's the exotic location? He's rented a house on the Welsh border near Hay-on-Wye. The fine sandy beaches of Herefordshire. He halved the tea towel and hung it over the radiator. I said yes. Well, thanks for the consultation. Angela paused and held his eye. Richard knows we can't afford a holiday of our own. I'm not looking forward to it any more than you, but I didn't have a great deal of choice. He held up his hands. Point taken. They'd had this argument way too many times. Herefordshire it is then. Ordnance Survey 161, the Black Mountains, Iminaddoedd Duon. Dominic flipped up the pink cover and unfolded the big paper concertina. He had loved maps since he was a boy. Here be monsters, X marks the spot. The edges of the paper browned and scalloped with a burning match. Messages flashed from peak to peak using triangles of broken mirror. He looked sideways at Angela. So hard to remember that girl on the far side of the Union Bar, her shoulders in that blue summer dress. She disgusted him now. The size and sag of her, the veins on her calves, almost a grandmother. He dreamt of her dying unexpectedly, rediscovering all those freedoms he'd lost 20 years ago. Then he had the same dream 5 minutes later, and he remembered what poor use he'd made of those freedoms first time round, and he heard the squeak of trolley wheels and saw the bags of fluid. All those other lives, you never did get to lead them. He gazed out of the window and saw a narrowboat on the adjacent canal, some bearded pillock at the tiller, pipe, mug of tea. Ahoy there, matey. Stupid way to spend a holiday, banging your head every time you stood up. A week in a boat with Richard. Think of that. They were in the middle of nowhere, thank goodness. If it all got too much, he could walk up into the hills and yell at the sky. To be honest, it was Angela he was worried about. All that hard-wired sibling friction. Do not return once lit, and so forth. Richard's hair, yes. Now that he thought about it, that was where the evil was located. This luxuriant black crest, like the tusks of a bull walrus, a warning to beta males. Or like a separate creature entirely, some alien life form that had pushed suckers into his skull and was using him as a vehicle. The children sat opposite. Alex, 17, was reading Main Force by Andy McNabb. Daisy, 16, was reading a book called The Art of Daily Prayer. Benji, 8, had swiveled so that his feet were on the headrest and his head was hanging over the edge of the seat, eyes closed. Angela poked his shoulder with the toe of her shoe. What on earth are you doing? I'm on horseback beheading Nazi zombies. They looked like children from 3 separate families. Alex, the athlete, all shoulders and biceps, off into the wide blue yonder every other weekend, canoeing, mountain biking. Benji, a kind of boy liquid, which had been poured into whatever space he happened to be occupying. And Daisy? Angela wondered if something dreadful had happened to her daughter over the past year, something that might explain the arrogant humility, the way she'd made herself so ostentatiously plain. They plunged into a tunnel, and the windows thumped and clattered. She saw an overweight, middle-aged woman floating out there in the dark for several seconds before she vanished in a blast of sunlight and poplars, and she was back in her body again, dress pinching at the waist, beads of sweat in the small of her back, that train smell, burning dust, hot brakes, and the dull reek of the toilets. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our penultimate reader, well, you know him as Mark Billingham, author of 11 bestsellers, including Sleepyhead, from which he'll be reading tonight. I first worked with Mark 20 years ago when he was in a kids' TV show called Maid Marian, and he was playing one of the henchmen of the Sheriff of Nottingham, I believe. He's come on leaps and bounds, and I'm still pretty much doing the same job. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the lovely Mark Billingham with Sleepyhead.
Hello. You are a fantastic audience. All the authors have been saying that backstage. You're attentive and, polite, and you haven't heckled. Not once. And it's probably a bit late now because it's almost the end of the evening, but you are welcome to heckle. Okay? No, really, you are. Your reticence is wise, though, because heckling is... Thank you very much. There you go. See, this proves my point. Heckling is a fine art. I worked for a number of years as a stand-up, and these are a couple of the heckles that I have witnessed, my hand to God, and your heckles have got to be this good. I once saw a comic come on stage at the Comedy Store in London, and for reasons best known unto himself, decided to spend the first 5 minutes of his act miming. I've no idea why I thought this was clever, but for 5 minutes, not a word. He's walking against the wind, he's trapped in a box, not a word. Until after about 5 minutes, a man stood up at the back of the room and went, "Oi, speak up, I'm blind." And it was brilliant. It was a 2-part heckle. The heckler waited a couple of minutes and then went, "Has he gone yet?" I was once on a bill with a stage hypnotist. You know those guys that makes people cluck like a chicken and eat onions and stuff. And he came out and he was very pompous. And he said, "Listen, I'm a proper stage hypnotist. This is not cheap theatrics. There's no shenanigans. Let me just make it clear. Have I ever met or worked with anybody in this room at all?" And they all went, "No." And there was a beat. And then a man went, "Master." The comedian Al Murray once came on stage and went, "Good evening, I'm a schizophrenic." And a bloke went, "Well, the pair of you can piss off then." So that's how good your heckles have got to be. It is really fantastic to be part of a fantastic day, and one of the best things about it is what is being given out to 1 million readers today is one of these, a book. Not a download, not a hyperlink, an actual physical thing. And to all those who talk about the death of the book and the inexorable rise of cutting-edge technology, I would just say that as cutting-edge technology goes, this thing is pretty bloody nifty, and it doesn't run out of batteries. It's been around in pretty much the same design for 500 years, and it's going nowhere. I would like to read you something funny and joyous and uplifting. I would like to, but my books aren't like that. This is an excerpt from Sleepyhead. Friday, June 15th, 1985, nearly going home time. It's a big one, the biggest since the Ripper. 15,000 interviews in 18 months, and they've got nothing. The press are going mental, but not that mental, obviously. It's not like he's killing women or straight blokes after all. Just the right amount of moral outrage and the odd comment about the risks inherent in that kind of lifestyle. No lurid nickname, though if the Sun could have got away with Puff Killer, they would certainly have used it. Just Johnny Boy. The fourth victim had told a friend he was meeting a man called John for a drink. This was an hour or so before he had his heart cut out and his genitals removed. Now an approximation of what might be Johnny Boy's face stares down from the wall of every nick in the country. He's got dirty blonde hair and a sallow complexion. His eyes are blue and very, very cold. Detective Constable Thomas Thorne leans against the wall of the interview room at Paddington Station and stares at a man with dirty blonde hair and blue eyes. Francis John Calvert, 34, a self-employed builder from North London. Any chance of a fag? I'm gasping. Calvert smiles, a winning smile. Thorne says nothing, just watching him until D.I. Duffy comes back. Surely I'm allowed one poxy fag. Then the door opens. Duffy comes back in and the interview resumes. None of it is riveting stuff. It's purely routine anyway. Calvert's only there because of what he does. A week before he died, the second victim told a flatmate he'd met a man in a club who said he was a builder. The flatmate made a joke about toolkits and builder's bum crack. 7 days and one body later and the joke wasn't funny anymore, but the flatmate remembered what his dead friend had said. Thousands of builders to be interviewed, so Calvert gets the phone call and comes into Paddington for a chat. Duffy gives Calvert his fag. He wants to get home. Thorne wants to get home too. He's been married less than a year. He's only got one ear on the answers. Calvert reels off. At home with his wife. Wishes he could go out gallivanting. Not to those sorts of places, obviously. He hopes they find this nutter and string him up. It doesn't matter what these pervs get up to in their private life. What this bloke's doing's disgusting. Duffy hands Calvert the short statement to sign, and that's that. Another one crossed off the list. He thanks him. Thorne holds the door open and Calvert steps out into the corridor. He strolls casually past more interview rooms, hands in pockets, whistling. Thorne can hear a distant radio, playing one of his favourite songs, There Must Be an Angel by the Eurythmics. Jan bought the record for him last week. He thinks about dinner. Maybe he can go and get a takeaway. Through the first set of swing doors and left, along another corridor which sweeps round towards main reception. Calvert waits, allowing Thorne to catch him up. He holds the doors for him. Bet you lot are making a mint in overtime. Thorne says nothing. He can't wait to see the back of the cocky little bastard. Past another Johnny Boy poster, somebody's drawn a speech bubble. It says, "Hello, sailor." Thorne's humming the Eurythmics song as he walks. He steps ahead of Calvert and pushes open the final set of doors. This is as far as he goes. Calvert steps through the doors, stops and turns. Cheers, then. Thorne is looking towards the desk sergeant when he feels the large, calloused hand take his and turns to look at Francis John Calvert, and everything changes. It isn't the resemblance to the photo fit. He'd registered that the instant he'd clapped eyes on Calvert and forgotten it again moments later. It isn't the resemblance, but it is the face. Thorne looks at Calvert's face and knows. It lasts no more than a second or two, but it's enough. He can see through to what lies behind those deep blue eyes, and what he sees terrifies him. He sees boozing, yes, and football on a Saturday and wolf whistles with the lads, and an incandescent rage, barely kept in check inside the cosy conformity of a loveless, sexless marriage. He sees something deep and dark and rotting, something fetid, spilling into the earth and bubbling with blood. He can't explain it. But he knows beyond a shadow of the smallest doubt that the man in front of him, the man shaking his hand, is responsible for stalking and slaughtering half a dozen gay men in the last year and a half. Then he sees the most terrifying thing of all. Calvert knows that he knows. Thorne thinks his face is frozen, expressionless, but obviously he's wrong. He can see the change in Calvert's eyes as they meet his own, just a slight flicker, the tiniest twitch, and the smile that is beginning to die a little. Then it's over. The grip is released, and Calvert is moving away through the lobby towards the main station doors. He stops for a second and turns, and now the smile is gone completely. The look Thorne sees on his face is something like fear. And somewhere in the distance, a sweet, high voice is still singing about imaginary angels. Thanks very much. Have a great evening.
Mark Billingham, ladies and gentlemen. Still got it as a stand-up. Back to the beginning. Our final reader this evening is Lemn Sissay. And I don't know if I explained properly earlier on, but all the World Book Night books have some Shakespearean sonnet in each of them, and a chapter selected by the author to perhaps tease and whet your appetite for further endeavours literary. So please welcome back the man who needs no second introduction, Lemn Sissay.
Oh, it's World Book Night! Woo! So happy to be here, and I did come here from the other side of the world. This morning I arrived. I'm so pleased about this sonnet because I just got it. A penny kind of dropped, and I'm happy. I was on the plane, by the way, and a woman said to me, "What do you do?" She was an air hostess. And I said, I said, "I'm a writer, I'm a poet." She said, "What does a poet do?" What do you do? What do you do? So I thought, I'm not going to say I write, you know what I mean? Because that would just not be cool. I said, no, because I didn't want to put her down. So I said, I do readings. You know, I do readings all over the world. And she said, will you read mine? I swear that's the truth, that happened, but I can't tell you which country it was. This is Sonnet 25. It's at the back of Damned United. And I want to read it in a Manchester accent. Let those who are in favour with their stars. Let those who are in favour with their stars of public honour and proud titles boast, whilst I, whom fortune of such triumph bars, unlooked for joy in that I honour most. Great princes, favourites, their fair leaves spread, but as the marigold at the sun's eye, and in themselves their pride lies buried, for at a frown they in their glory die. The painful warrior, famous for fight, after 1,000 victories once foiled, is from the book of honour raised quite, and all the rest forgot for which he toiled. Then happy I, that love and am beloved, where I may not remove, nor be removed.
I could hear him read the yellow pages and be thoroughly entertained. One thing's for sure, Lemn Sissay will never be removed from the Book of Honour. That's it for this part of the evening. Drinks and books are being given away given away willy-nilly, nilly-willy, in the front room. Also, you're going to be offered a World Book Night cocktail, which also has a Shakespearean component, and a chapter from another cocktail. No, it doesn't. The night unfolds with music, poetry, performances, and general chit-chat. At the end of the evening, there are going to be some Shakespearean sonnets. I just want to leave you with this. I'm the child of an immigrant. My mum grew up in Nairobi, herself the child of an immigrant to East Africa under the British Raj. She grew up with 2 books in her house. So when we came to Britain, I was born here. When she came to Britain, we had 2 books in our house. And the books in our house actually were treated with too much respect, put on high shelves. We weren't allowed to read them as often as we'd like to. So in my adult life, the one thing I've done is I've filled my flat full of books. Wherever you look, there are piles of books. And like you, I'll never get round to reading all those books. But I know one thing, that my flat without books would be this evening without an audience. Kind of pointless. Thank you so much for coming, and see you later.